I think this is actually a good time to transition into talking specifically about the Altra Paradigm 6. So we've been testing that. We all have finished our review. It should be releasing any day now. So that review is coming out, and we're going to talk about it a little bit on here. It's been really fun. Just David and I think, have the Magnafly 4 from Topo. So those have been two shoes that have been fun to test side by side because they're both sit a little bit in a similar camp, with the Paradigm being more stability driven is kind of some of the goals of the design. But they both kind of have this slightly higher stack, zero drop, daily trainer-esque vibe. And maybe we'll talk about a couple differences, but we're going to zero in. That's funny. We're going to zero in mostly on the Paradigm 6. A couple things about the Paradigm 6. It is their kind of premium stability shoe from Altra. They're using the new Ego Max.
Yeah.
The Ego Max midsole. And it's constructed with a number of sidewalls, really big sidewalls, both on the medial and lateral sides that they call guide rails. And then has some flex grooves in the bottom. It has that wider anatomical toe box, and then a unique lacing system that we'll talk about as well. In addition to that, just from a weight perspective, I think it's 10.3 ounces. Yep, in my men's size 9, and it's got 34 millimeters of stack. So it's a pretty high stack zero drop shoe. So it sits in a unique category for kind of max cushion, zero drop, kind of premium stability, slightly heavier model, but not 13 ounces. So we're going to talk about this shoe. What did you guys think about fit for the Altra Paradigm 6? Crickets.
I'll start out. Crickets. Okay. I'll go. I promise.
I think the problem is David.
I was in character.
Yeah, David's in character.
I'm waiting to see if David wants to respond first. I know I always respond for. I'm, by the way, exactly like this in class. So if you're ever if I'm ever in one of your classes for whatever reason, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm first to say anything. It's pretty typical Ultra fit. I found the fits fairly wide. Obviously, especially in the forefoot, because they do the toe box, the foot shaped, not toe shaped, foot shaped toe box. The heel in all Ultras has always been really wide for me, so I got some heel slippage in here as well, despite the sidewalls. So I just had the lace socket, which I undid just for today's video. But outside of that, it's pretty comfortable, a little thicker upper, right? It's a little bit more of a premium shoe. But tongue was fit really nicely. I don't have anything crazy to say. It was actually just a really nice, solid upper. What do you guys think?
David, what you got?
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of that. I think overall it's dialed in pretty good. Every Ultra that I've tried, I've had the same experience, usually slightly wide through the heel, probably normal to slightly wide through the midfoot, and then usually a pretty wide forefoot, since that is essentially what they're going for with that foot shape and toe splay and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I did have to lace it down pretty tight because I did notice my heel would translate a tiny bit, especially with turns or if I took it in trails. Not a trail shoe, but yes.
Yep.
But any times I was in kind of more quote unquote unstable conditions, I would notice that thing moving around a little bit.
Yeah.
So I just had to lace it down really tight. But yeah, I mean, if you have problems with shoes that are being too narrow consistently, these do tend to run on the wider end just in general. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I have a slightly more narrow foot. So I had some issues just overall with getting this thing to lock down for me well. I think I had enough space up front that I could have went a half size down, and maybe that would have helped a little bit. But one of the things that I did, so I think they call it the Innovarch is that lacing system that they have, and the strap kind of goes down all the way into the last of the shoe, or kind of the base of the shoe, the platform. And let's see if I can show the people who are watching. Yeah, right in there you can, well, no, it's not really well seen, but it goes right into the foot platform. And if you pull on it, you can see inside the shoe that it's lifting up kind of the area where the arch is at. So there's two different eyelets on the Innovarch. And so I went to the one that was further down. And that was the one thing that did help lock in my midfoot a little bit. But even with that, the heel was wide. The midfoot was too wide for me with a slightly more narrow foot. Toe box felt great. I mean, I really do like that anatomical fit, but it was just too wide for me. And so I just couldn't really get it locked down super well. I just had to tie it really tight. That said, and I'm having the same issue with the Lone Peak 5, except the Lone Peak's heel is like even wider than the Paradigm by quite a bit. So it's super comfortable for walking. Like I definitely see why it's been the top shoe for thru hikers of the Appalachian Trail for a number of years. But that wider heel is getting to me in terms of just comfort running. The other issue I had is the tongue always ends up way out on the side for me. It's non-gusseted, and mine has just been moving way over by the time I'm done running. And so that's just been a little bit of an annoyance in terms of comfort. However, what I would say, and I wrote this in my review, but the materials themselves feel really high end, and it's breathable, but it's also slightly thicker, which we're getting into kind of the deeper side of fall, getting closer to winter. Like this is the type of upper that I like to have for those colder months. That still did fine earlier in the fall when it was still decently warm out when I was running. So I did appreciate the construction of the upper, kind of the quality of materials, and it was just too wide for me. But let's talk a little bit about zero drop, the stability elements of this shoe, and if this felt like a zero drop shoe to you guys. So Matt, why don't you go into the stability elements of it, how it worked for you, who you think it might work best for, and then what kind of drop you felt like this shoe had.
So David is the jack of all trades. He can literally run in anything. I tend to prefer a little bit of stability. Nathan, you're doing better with that? You're still really sensitive to stability stuff.
I'll get to it.
Okay, I'll get to it. All right. Sorry, I'm jumping the gun. I loved how they did stability in this shoe. Depending on the shoe, I can be sensitive to posts or not. This is not a posted shoe. They're using guide rails. They're using a wider fit, so the midfoot does not narrow. It's filled in. There's excellent use of flex screws with the forefoot. Despite being a 34 millimeter stack, this is pretty flexible. This was amazing. So plus a really solid toe spring up front. So stability wise, there's a lot of, I would call this a guidance shoe. The shoe doesn't force you in any way, but once you get moving, it keeps your foot centered. It's really, really nice. Also super comfortable to walk in. If you can handle a zero drop shoe, probably one of my top walking shoes for a lot of people out there, especially if you're in the medical field standing on hard floors, but that's off topic. So lots of really good stability elements. And I really appreciate that they also put a guide rail on the lateral aspect, because some people pronate, some people go a little bit too far out. So it's got it on both sides. The guide rails are really the primary way this is done. And instead of just having a firm piece of material called a post, it's elevated up. So it's just this nice guidance thing that kind of keeps you down the middle. And, they also do this with these really nice longitudinal flex screws too. So I would call it a guided shoe, and nothing is overbearing. It just all works together really well as a whole. So it's really good. I think even people that might have neutral mechanics might be able to do well in this shoe because nothing's jamming into your foot, which is really nice.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. I think where I've ran into problems, there are many, many stability shoes that I pass on from a testing perspective, and it's mainly when the carriage for stability sits underneath the foot itself. So like a post, like if there's a dual density post, I typically don't do as well and just develop pain, which just is not fun to have. And so what I appreciated about this one is that it was for someone like me who typically likes neutral mechanic, who likes neutral shoes that don't have anything kind of pushing the foot. It really was a guidance thing. And I think because I have a more narrow foot, I even felt less of the impact from the stability mechanisms because they sit on the outside. And so, but I did well with this one with no problems. And I did take it on some slightly longer efforts. And on days I was a little bit more tired, I didn't mind having a little bit of that support, both on the inside and the outside. I think this is one of the few shoes that has a construction that is potentially advantageous for those who do have supination issues and who are riding a little bit further outside. I think another one that pops into my head is the Eternity Nitro from Puma. And that's not a zero drop shoe, but just kind of a little bit more cushion, having something kind of sidewall on the outside that's trying to give some guidance there as well. I think that those two things really were helpful. And I think the other piece of stability that this did well is this is like the first lacing system that I felt really like cinched up on the inside of the arch if you use that in of arch lacing system to its max potential. So I appreciated that about it too. David, do you have anything else on stability?
No, I thought they did a good job. I mean, I wrote about it a lot in the DPT section, and it's just the sidewalls, the wide platform, full contact outsole, no usage of a post, but yes, filling in through the midfoot as well, creating some intrinsic rigidity and things like that, but also allowing for some flexibility with those flex grooves. Because I think that's where people get hung up on a lot too, is it's like, oh, it has to be really rigid in order for it to be stable.
Right.
Not necessarily.
Right.
So I think from a dynamic stability standpoint, they did a really good job. I mean, my only knock with it was just the heel security, really.
Agreed.
I actually really enjoyed it. Yeah, from a stability standpoint, that's probably all I got there. I like that the guide rail too isn't super high the whole way. It also tapers off and kind of lets you do your own thing as you transition more anteriorly into the forefoot. Yeah, I like it. I mean, it's a good shoe.
Let's talk about ride a little bit then. Talking about drop, how much it's a zero drop shoe. How much does it feel like that? And then, this is the Ego Max midsole. How soft, how firm, how bouncy, how not, kind of how we describe ride. David, why don't you take this one first and give us your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for being as high stack as this shoe is, it definitely rode firmer than I was expecting. And I ran in the Paradigm 3, I believe was the last Paradigm I ran in, the black on gray one. And I remembered that one being softer, in all honesty, like compared to this one. And not a bad thing. If anything, it makes it more stable, firming it up a little bit and putting all those other components into it. I felt like the ground feel was much better in this model than what I remember. But yeah, a little bit on the firmer end. I think the bevel's done pretty well. It's not huge, but it's enough to transition pretty quickly throughout that heel to midfoot and then ultimately in the forefoot. Not a whole lot of toe spring, but they have those deep flex grooves, so they don't really need to. It's almost like, it does allow your foot and your ankle and your joints to move a little bit more naturally through it, and it kind of puts it all on you in some ways.
Yep.
While still reinforcing things here and there throughout the shoe. But ultimately, it's still going to be it's all on you. It's more of a natural feel throughout. But yeah, I think they did the heel pretty well. Midfoot solid through the transition through there. It's all relatively quick. A little bit more time on the forefoot just because of the deep flex grooves and the level platform, so you don't just roll through. But I mean, it feels good. Traction solid.
Did you mention how did it feel zero drops to you, or did you say it specifically?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think we were talking about it earlier. I think a lot of these companies are just getting better at making shoes. In the past, zero drop shoes, it was like, oh yeah, this is a zero drop. And it's like, I can still tell it's a zero drop, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like what I would perceive to be a zero drop. Where it feels like a daily trainer. Yes, the heel and the forefoot, there's no offset, and you can notice that a little bit, but the transitions are all there. All the components and tools you need are there. It just feels a little bit different, I would say, like later in the run, where normally maybe you have a firmer forefoot but a higher stack, and then you kind of just plop off of the thing. It's a little bit more and it's a little bit more in the calves and foot and ankle later in the run. But besides that, I mean, it's not bad. It's not like it's not like a track spike or something where you're like, you're going to be regretting it the next day.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like something you have to quite literally train yourself up to. it's a much more fluid transition. So can I tell it's a zero drop? Yeah. But I mean, it could very easily, it's almost very like Hoka-esque. I hate to bring another company into it, but they have a 4mm drop platform, and it feels pretty similar to what a Hoka would feel like. In a lot of ways.
Don't they?
What's that?
Doesn't Hoka do 5mm drop?
Depends on the shoe.
In some models.
Oh.
5 is really
mostly
common.
4, I think. But
Cool
either
beans.
way, I mean, like low, but still they have a drop. And the bevels might be a little sharper on a Hoka than this one, but the components are there, and it feels like a daily trainer.
Those extended crash pads.
Yeah, man, crash pads, they're real.
I almost wrote that in the review. And I'm like, I can't do it.
Sorry, everybody. There's an inside joke about crash pads that we're not going to go into. Yeah, David, I think I agree with you a lot. I think that it ran really a lot firmer than I expected. And in testing this compared to the Lone Peak 5, you okay?
No. How the heck did I do that?
What happened?
It's probably the
I got
force.
my leg somehow tangled up in my mic. Like the wire, it's literally, it goes down, under, around, back up to the laptop. I have zero idea how I did that.
It's probably the force.
Stuck. I have to literally move my leg out of this.
Well, good luck. While you're doing
I'm out
that.
now.
I have no idea how I'm
saved.
going to get out. Oh, I'm out.
I'm Grogu. I have the force.
That's hilarious. Comparing the Ego Max in this shoe compared to the Ego midsole in the Lone Peak 5, the Lone Peak 5 actually feels a lot softer, a lot softer. Part of that might be because there's less of it, so you can really just feel the deformation of what's there. But and I'm saying dynamically, when I'm running, not just a press test. It just feels firmer in the paradigm, which I think helps from a zero drop perspective, where the heel doesn't sink in so much, and I'm a pretty for sure heel striker, or at least rear foot striker, and I didn't feel like I was sinking down, and so I did some of my runs using a different insole that we're testing, the Connect insole, and that has a 4mm drop, and I could definitely tell the difference between wearing that compared to the zero drop, and it was fun to compare between runs, what it would feel like with or without an insert that had a drop to it. So I would agree with David that for me, it felt like a zero drop shoe, but I never once came back with the sore calf. The next day, even after my hour-long run in it, I didn't have soreness in the calves afterwards, which I think speaks to some of those transitions, as well as I mean, for us, we are constantly testing tons of different types of shoes, so our bodies have learned to adapt. So I think from a transitions point, and we're going to go next, we're going to talk about how we think people should transition to zero drop shoes, or considerations to have. So we'll go there in a minute. But I think that this is one of those that could be one of the more approachable options for people, regardless of if you need stability or not. I think people with neutral mechanics will do just fine in this shoe. But again, those who have some stability needs. But I think that the platform, the geometry, and the higher cushion allows for maybe a slightly easier transition to a zero drop shoe in this one. Matt, what do you think about firmness and drop and that kind of thing?
I totally echo that, where, I've been dealing with some Achilles stuff on and off and managing it fairly well. I was able to probably not the best word given my lack of plyometric strength, but I was able to run right into it. For those curious, I had the worst vertical jump of my entire undergraduate exercise science class, so I can just run really far. But I was able to get right into it, and I actually live in a fairly hilly area, and so didn't really have any issues. I had an Achilles flare-up due to something totally different, i.e. stress and a lack of sleep, which don't discount those when it comes to injury stuff. So walking in these was great. They were super smooth. Running in them was super smooth. Again, I was same with those two. I was aware of a zero drop shoe, but didn't come away sore. I think again, the toe spring and how well the forefoot flexes, it was really smooth. Yep. I think the firmness does help with the stability. And like David, the last paradigm I ran in was the 4.0. That Ego midsole was super bouncy. I could do workouts in it. This is a mileage shoe. I wouldn't try to do workouts, but it's a great shoe to transition in. This whole time I've been trying to come up with a joke about the Ego
Oh,
midsole, but I'll stop.
it's just you're not figuring it out. I agree with you.
No, yeah.
The other
I was
thing
gonna
I
say
wanted
something.
to
The
say about
shoe,
the ride of the shoe, I couldn't really pick up the pace in it really at all. It feels kind of bottom heavy to me. Like it sits on the heavier end now, but it has a daily trainer feel to it, but I really couldn't pick up the pace. It felt a little bit flatter, not super bouncy, and just overall heavy because the upper is thicker and the midsole is a lot of stack. So I felt like I couldn't turn over quickly. How do we revive David when he has these episodes? Do we have to like clap 3 times? I haven't seen, this is from Star Trek, right?
Star Wars.
Darn it, I thought that would get him.
We're gonna lose.
I thought that would get him.
We're gonna. I was like, dude, we're gonna lose like all of our fan base if you say that.
No, I thought that maybe saying Star Trek would be what could revive him, but okay.
No,
the last
dead.
topic that we want to talk about today, and I'll say a little bit about this just because this is what I wrote about in my DPT section, and then you guys can build off of what I say here. But we're going to talk about things to consider when transitioning to a zero drop shoe. So we've talked about that the main difference is going to be the demand on the Achilles, both, hey, he's alive, both in the amount of motion that the Achilles and the calf has to go through, as well as the amount of work that the calf has to do. And so some of the things that I wrote about was to consider using this shoe during the day or for walks for the first couple of weeks to allow your body to get used to having this kind of motion that's demanded of your foot. And so, let's say you get your shoe, I would honestly wear it for like 2 weeks or more without a run, and just, especially if you've never ran in a zero drop shoe, and just use it walking, use it standing at work, whatever is appropriate for you and how your life works, but kind of starting there. And then I would use it for a very short, and short is going to be relative to the person, but for me, that would be like a 30-minute run. So take it out for a 30-minute run and then not use it again until the next week. So do one run in it, see how your body adapts to it. And then you can slowly add in maybe 10 to 20% mileage in that shoe over the next month. And within that month, that first month of using the shoe for running, I kind of recommended and kind of recommend having at least one other run in between uses of the zero drop shoe to allow for adaptation of the tissues. So thinking about physiology and recovery, tendons, when they're loaded, take 36 to 52 hours to reform their collagen fibers. So this is kind of getting nerdy, but if you think about 36 to 52 hours, running in it 2 days in a row or even every other day might not be quite enough time for the tendon to reform. So giving it over that first couple times, giving yourself 3 to 4 days in between with another run in there, but in another shoe, could be a really good idea. And then slowly increasing that over time, 10 to 20% of your total mileage per week in the zero drop shoe, if you're wanting to make a transition to using it regularly. And then in the meantime, because we talked about the demand put on the calf, it would be doing tendon loading and muscle strengthening exercises, daily calf raises, a little bit of plyometric work with your calves just to prepare them for the loading that they're going to need to do. So I have that kind of written out in my DPT section. What do you guys think about kind of that kind of flow of transitioning to zero drop, and what else would you consider?
Yeah, I think a lot of the components are there. For a lot of people, it's not going to be quite as structured as that. I agree, though. I would say wear them at work, walk around in them, get used to just the general feel of the shoe first, because it is a different geometry and type of shoe than what most of the other shoes on the market are. And then just take them for a shakeout, whatever that means for you. So for me, it's probably 4 or 5 miles. That's kind of my normal break-in for most shoes. Or if I do a workout, I'll wear them for the warm-up of a workout. And so for me, it's usually about 3 miles. And then I change shoes into whatever I'm doing the workout in. And then, yeah, give it a day off or so, see how you feel, and then come back around. I'm not sure you have to wait 2 weeks, but or a full week or whatever. But like, you can kind of play around with it. And obviously we're used to running in a bunch of different shoes, but usually for me, I probably would do a 4 to 5 mile shakeout for my first run. My next run in them is probably going to be right around 10. And then then I just fit it into my schedule of whatever I'm doing based on the day, since I do have a program that I follow, kind of wherever it's convenient from that point forward. But it's like, if I could take a 10, it's like I can pretty much run whatever distance I want within reason in it. So
yeah, that's impressive. A 10 is scary for me. But you're running how many miles a week?
I've been averaging about 75 to 80 for the last like 6 or so.
Yeah. So you're a lot higher mileage. So 10 of your week is like 5 of my week, so it's just different depending on the person. Matt, what thoughts do you have on transitioning?
I would say, again, you guys have already hit this on the head in terms of take your time, right? Walking in them for especially zero drop, just give your body time to get used to that. There's some very good evidence that in terms of foot strengthening, you can do like intrinsic foot strengthening exercises, or you can actually walk around barefoot or in a low drop shoe or a minimal shoe, and it actually does something similar if you do it the right way, which is great. So obviously the transition and taking your time is important. My big 3 things for going to a low drop shoe, regardless of cushion, is going to be, as you mentioned, calf mobility work, whether that's stretching or making sure your ankle can move into this range better, because that's where you're going to be going. Calf strengthening obviously is going to be part 2, because you're now having to handle new loads at a new range, and muscles are length specific, meaning if you have not strengthened a muscle in a range, if you go there, it's not going to be able to generate a lot of force unless you prep it. The last one is balance. I'd say when you start loading your ankle into that new range, some of your balance that's not related to your inner ear or your vision comes from what's called your somatary sensory system, which is just the nerves that are in your joints, ligaments, stuff like that. So these joints and ligaments are not usually used to being stressed like that. So just working on being barefoot or being in this shoe and working on balancing on one leg, which is essentially what running is, it's a series of one leg hops, can be really helpful just to make sure your balance is solid so nothing else is compensating. So calf mobility, ankle mobility, calf strengthening, single leg balance are kind of my big 3 things, along with slowly transitioning into the shoe and letting your body get used to it. Yep. And how you do that is going to be dependent on you. Some people can go super quick. Other people, they're going to take more time. Listen to your body.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I wanted to put some guidelines in there, because there is not a perfect way to do a transition. Mm-hmm. But I think listening to how and as you run more and more, you're gonna learn, what does it mean when my Achilles feels like this versus when it feels like that, because one of those feelings is just an adaptation and the other one is maybe something to really pay attention to. And that's where, as you learn your body, you're going to figure those things out. But thinking about a slow transition and letting physiological principles take their course is a big deal. Like a muscle doesn't really get stronger you get neuromuscular changes over the first 4 weeks of regular strengthening, but the muscle doesn't really get stronger for 6 to 8 to 12 weeks. So to expect your calf to be stronger just from like a week of work is not reasonable. And so just thinking about your transition, depending on what your running history is, what types of shoes you've ran in, what kind of strengthening habits you have, you got to take all that stuff into account before you make a transition. So I think it's time to get going. DJ's it's falling asleep or passed out or whatever happens to that character. So we should probably let him go. Also, he's a Cowboys fan and they're playing right now. And I'm sadly cheering for the Cowboys because they're playing the Vikings and they're in the Packers division. So it feels weird to want the Cowboys to win, but I guess I do tonight. So DJ and I can still be friends. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. As always, we really appreciate kind of what this DOR family has become for us. We've been getting to know a lot of people who've been asking us questions and kind of participating in all this. So it's been a lot of fun. And you can continue to follow what we're doing on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Strava, and YouTube, and obviously this podcast that we're listening to on any platform. So feel free to follow us there. And again, reviews help grow the podcast awareness and keep stay tuned for some news coming in the new year. Take care, y'all.
He's